All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the first in our discussion of our Library of Gratitude book of the year. Hopefully, our first Library of Gratitude book. The book that we read together as a congregation is called Here All Along: Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism, after finally choosing to look there, by Sarah Hurwitz. Members of our congregation were able to receive this book as a gift by virtue of the generous donations of many folks in our community, and especially the Men's Club, the Sadie Schneider Rosh Chodesh Learning Group, the Adult Education Committee, and the Education Endowment. And it was by their donations that we were able to provide everybody this book in the Mishloach Manot package at Purim, and to bring Sarah Hurwitz to come and talk to us this coming Sunday night. That is a program you do not want to miss. Tonight's program is more informal. I'm sort of imagining it as a book club, kind of like if we were meeting in my living room, or in these COVID times, maybe all masked and on chairs in my front yard, just in a big circle. I know that there are a lot of book clubs that have met that way. And I brought some questions that I thought were interesting questions with regard to the first half of the book, which is what we're going to discuss tonight. And the other goal of this opportunity for us to come together and share is to think about what kinds of questions we're hoping that Sarah Hurwitz will answer when we talk to her on Sunday. The format of that's going to be more interview style. I'm going to have questions prepared in advance, which I will share with her, and which she will answer. And this is our opportunity to generate some more questions that I can ask her from within our group, so that we're able to do that. So that will be a secondary goal. The first goal really is just to have us have an opportunity to have a conversation about the book, especially the second half, the part one. What did you think of it? Was it meaningful to you? How did it change your thinking about certain aspects of Judaism? And like I said, I did bring some questions that I thought would be useful questions to help guide our conversation.
Did just coming for a little bit.
And I guess the first question that I'd like to ask, if anybody would like to respond, and you can raise your hands, or you can use the raise hand feature in the chat. The first question is, does anybody have any reactions overall to the first half of the book? What drew you in? What did you find meaningful? Was there anything that particularly stood out to you? And we'll start there. Mishka.
I was very much drawn into the book. I will say the first half more so than the second, the first part more so than the second. The first thing just drew me in was her style, her very honest, open style, and in the way you could say it was an easy read, and you got a sense of her personality as well. You and I have had discussions about the nature of God. So clearly, when I got to the part about images of God and so on, that's a part that really resonated with me. And there were other things, but if you're talking about the primary one, that was it for me.
All right, Marcia.
Are we muted? Oh,
Nope, you're good.
okay. I was very interested in her Hebrew school experience.
Yeah.
It made me very sort of sad to see how her parents just let her call all the shots and didn't try to make her go back. That's all.
Did anybody find that experience that she relates resonated with you or your kids or your experience at religious school? Bob, you have to unmute.
There we go. I would have to say that my Hebrew school experience was similar to hers in many ways. It was very much meaningless. The most I got out of it was reading the Bible stories in English, which was more of a filtering of midrash than Bible stories. And I came to Jewish practice and more knowledge as I was an adult. So I very much resonated with where she was at with her Hebrew school.
Did anybody else find that they also resonated with that? Eileen?
Yeah, it really touched home with me when I read that. And I like the fact that that's how the book started off, and why I really felt once I started reading, I really wanted my children to read this book, because one of the pieces that, I really took away, and even for me growing up with two Israelis and non-practicing home, it's that the idea that maybe those experiences aren't meaningful at the time you're going through them, but you just know in the back of your head that your Judaism is important, and there's something there that is meaningful, but you can't wrap your hands around the why. And that's why I thought it was such a good message. And also the piece, like Mishka was saying, about God and your definition of God and how you define God, because that's such a personal choice that you can raise your kids with Judaism, but you can't really enforce that. That is such a personal decision, what you believe and what you don't believe. And so she really gives you permission to understand the value without putting labels, so to speak. So I just thought it was really powerful. I thought her style of writing was fabulous. And so that was the initial piece that grabbed me.
Great. I want to actually follow up. I know maybe there are still people who have general reflections, and we can come back to that, but I want to follow up on this idea of religious school and what grabs you, what causes the reason to be Jewish, what is meaningful. So one of the questions that I thought of is this: the book devotes one section of one chapter, right? It's a whole book, finding meaning, spirituality, and a deeper connection to life in Judaism, right? Lots of pages. There are 3 pages that deal with anti-Semitism. One section of one chapter. That's on page 41 to 44, right? Judging from your own experience with anti-Semitism or your perception of other people's experiences, do you think that is enough of a focus on anti-Semitism? Is it too much of a focus on anti-Semitism, and why? So this is this is a question that I actually think really picks up on what Eileen was saying about how she read the book and really thought, I really want my kids to read it. I do feel, even as a rabbi who clearly has invested a lot of time in thinking about Jewish stuff, I do feel that there has been in some ways a message given by older generations to younger generations that we have to be Jewish because of anti-Semitism. And this book presents a much broader approach to what is meaningful about Judaism. and really only touches on anti-Semitism in a very small way. And so I wanted to raise that up and see what people thought about that.
And I,
Yeah, Bob.
okay. Her book is very well written. It's simple. It's not a sophisticated piece of work. She brings and she precipitates two cosmic matters. One is, was the book written by man or written by God and dictated? And the second one, a far more important one, is the attributes of God. If you follow very carefully, Neil Gaiman in his book, Sacred Fragments, brings the same two questions in the beginning of his book. The word of God or the word of man, and he gets into the attributes. But her questions are not original. Almost everybody who reads the Bible has to come up with the same questions that she comes up, and we're looking for answers. Neil Gaiman tries to give answers or options on it, and it would have been far more worthwhile for her to have studied Neil Gaiman's work in Sacred Fragments to come up with his answers. Another very important question she asks, and I feel it's far more important not to discuss the existence of God, which I can do only in philosophical terms, but the attributes of God are far more important. And these attributes of God we can get by reading the Torah, or we can get from philosophy. And these are the big questions that we have. And this is the most important part of Judaism today, I feel, is answering the questions on the attributes of God. Neil, I'm going to tell you a sideshow, and Neil Gaiman was sitting right across of me, maybe 2 feet away, and he put his hands through his hair and he said to me, I'm not going to really go into the existence of God, but I have doubts about the attributes of God. And that's what I think almost modern scholars today have to face up to, what the attributes of God. But far more important, she takes the position of asking these questions, and she's befuddled by it. But we have to today answer these questions. And it's the purpose today, I think, for the rabbi and the scholars to come out and see if they can answer the questions that she has precipitated. And that's the only way I think we may survive. Most Jews today, 90%, are inept with respect to the understanding of Jewish philosophy and Jewish dogma. She precipitates important questions, and they have to be answered, but I think they have to be discussed up front. And that's one of the ways we'll survive. I enjoyed reading her book. I think she did not really get into Neil Gaiman's work and the references. Neil Gaiman would have helped her a lot if she read the book. And I'm a very strong advocate of Neil Gaiman's work, and also Elliot Dorff. But she precipitates good questions. They are answered in different ways. There's no question today that the Torah is the work of man. And I get into the documentary hypothesis, which is very strong, but there are other things besides that which support this contention. I think Neil Gaiman does the best job on it, but she was very good in precipitating the problem, but she points out the weakness we have today in Judaism, and that is not discussing the questions that she brings up.
Right. So Bob, I think it's a really great point that you bring, which is the questions that she's asking are the questions that we all have in our hearts, right? That's why she is able to find meaning, spirituality, and a deeper connection to life, is by asking these questions and thinking about the various answers, the multiplicity of answers that Judaism gives. It was clear to me from reading that she not only had encountered Gilman's work, but that many of the teachers that she talks about are the faithful students of Gilman. You probably know that Gilman taught at the seminary for a very long time, and both my parents studied with him for a long time. I feel like just being raised in my parents' house, right, was a training in the sacred fragments. Later, when I read the book, I was like, oh, I know this stuff. This is what I was raised with. I actually find the philosophical approach of that book to leave me feeling dry. And I felt that some of the responses that Sarah brings actually resonated with me on a deeper emotional level than the philosophy has in the past. And I suspect that there are many other folks who also resonate more with some of the simpler, more emotional responses to those questions than the philosophical. But I value your approach to Judaism and your approach to the importance of looking at the deeper philosophical questions. So I wanted to return to see if anybody had any feelings about anti-Semitism, whether that subject was dealt with enough in the book, whether it was dealt with too much in the book, and also if anybody has any responses to what Bob just shared, feel free to also respond to him. Anybody feel free to raise your hand. Gary, you have to unmute.
I just wanted to say I was surprised to hear you say something like one should be Jewish because of anti-Semitism. That's really new to me. So if people have experiences of that, I'd be interested to hear about it. But there sometimes is this disconnect between my own experience and the experience, I'm just having a short discussion in the book, and the awfully large number of charitable solicitations that I get all the time describing serious problems of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Definitely, people use the fear of anti-Semitism as a way of raising money. No question about that. I guess when I said you should be Jewish because of anti-Semitism was a message that I got. I think that message gets filtered in many different ways, sort of, we survived, therefore we should stay Jewish. Your great-grandparents suffered in pogroms and through the Holocaust and whatever, so you're gonna go out and abandon your Jewish identity? Like, right, that kind of feeling, which doesn't actually say anything, at least to me, about the content of Judaism itself. It's a desire to stay within Judaism only because of tradition, because of it's passed down through the generations, as opposed to Judaism gives you meaning in life. Mishka, I saw your hand.
Thank you. One comment to Bob, just that I do remember somewhere in the book her mentioning, I believe Arthur Wasco's term that Israel really means God wrestler. And I think that's a very important part of what she's doing and what most of us are doing. We don't have answers. And in many ways, we don't necessarily need firm answers. We just need to be asking questions and having dialogues about that. But when you asked about anti-Semitism, my first thought was, I want to ask the kids, what did they talk about in Hebrew school with regard to anti-Semitism? I never heard anything. never any feedback from them, at least. So that'll be some phone calls. But I grew up in a congregation of mostly survivors, mostly Yekas, German Jews who survived or came over shortly before the horrors began. And everybody there was there because they were a survivor. And there was a clear message: you're Jewish because we got through it, you better be. I don't remember any overt conversations about anti-Semitism at all.
All right, great. Mark.
I think what I enjoyed so much about the book was that we can't depend on anti-Semitism or the Holocaust, because eventually we're not going to have survivors of the Holocaust left. And I think what she pointed out is that the importance of Judaism and what Judaism has brought to mankind. To me, Shabbat is probably one of the greatest gifts that Judaism has brought to the world. And going on from there, that to me was the importance of the book. It makes Judaism worthwhile and why we need to preserve it, but not because of anti-Semitism.
Jeff?
I was going to say something similar. What I liked about the book is it gives a lot of reasons. I have family members and friends who are cynical. Maybe they don't see, they're not into the ritual or this and that. They observe things because they feel they have to or they feel guilty. But this, if I can get them to read this book, there's so much that's positive that says, yeah, this is a religion that we should be promoting and you should feel proud of, and you can observe it in a myriad of different ways. And it really was inspiring. I mean, I really, really enjoyed the book. I like the fact that it was written from a perspective of someone who did have a lot of questions and emphasizing that questioning is okay. And you don't have to believe in God, or you can believe in God this way or that way. There is no one right way. And for that reason, the religion has adapted and survived despite every obstacle thrown in our way for 3,000 plus years. And so I really want to get others to read this book.
Thank you. Andy?
I fully agree with the Handelmans on this, that this is a book that more people need to read. And the reason is that she starts with the question, like you said, this not so wonderful experience in Hebrew school, right? And then the book goes on to answer, look at all these wonderful things that are in Judaism that you don't learn in Hebrew school. And you don't learn, I'm going to even say, in modern synagogues, right? We don't really express, you actually, Rabbi, are doing a good job of trying to bring out some of these aspects, but it's not mainstream Judaism. And so I don't, to me, your question about anti-Semitism, that's not the object of the book isn't why you should be Jewish. It's, this is what Judaism has to offer. And so I'm not sure that your question is correct or needed.
Thanks. So let's move on to another question. I was reading through in preparation for this discussion, and there was something that really struck me. She says on page 26, the Torah strikes me as an unavoidably political document, a passionate protest against the old hierarchies and abuses of power. Time and again, the younger son usurps the firstborn to carry on the family line, and God consistently favors the powerless over the powerful, slaves over pharaohs, widows and orphans over those who would oppress them. And the sacred teachings are shared with all Israelites, all standing on equal footing at Mount Sinai, all giving their consent to be governed by God, rather than just an elite few. You can cite the Torah and other Jewish texts to support many different opinions on issues like immigration and healthcare, but it does not strike me as a particularly Jewish approach to ignore these issues because they are too political. That would, I think, be missing the point. So she says, the Torah is a political document, and therefore it's appropriate for rabbis to speak about politics in their sermons from the Bima as part of their practice of Judaism. What are the benefits and the pitfalls of this approach?
I would say-
Steve.
So I'm not sure I'd draw the connection quite directly that way. I would be more inclined to say that the Torah is an ethical document, or at least in one of its manifestations is that it has an ethical story. And that once you have a comprehensive view of ethics, political views have to follow from that. But I think to view it as being political without embracing the ethical reasoning behind the political views that it takes is to miss a piece of a deeper level of what's going on there, part of the philosophical level, to bring it back to where Bob was.
Do you feel like she misses the ethics piece, or do you feel like she has that, but not maybe in the paragraph that I quoted?
It's definitely there. I haven't looked at the book for a couple of weeks. I have the sense that I would have, and not so much that I would like there to be more ethics, but that I would like there to be deeper ethics. But that also is, I have this academic bent that probably builds that desire in for me.
Other thoughts on what are the benefits and pitfalls of the approach of having rabbis speak politics from the Bima? Rob.
Okay. I think, she's looking at it through her own lens, spoken as an optometrist, her liberal slant. And the danger is that, people on both sides of the political aisles can use quotes from the Bible to say whatever they want to say, be it, people who owned slaves, well, that was in the Bible, to have slavery. But people can use it to justify a lot of things. And it's a dangerous road you go down when you start to use it as a political document. So that's just what I think.
I think Rob speaks very persuasively about one of the pitfalls of the approach. It's great. Jeff?
I would say, certainly having a rabbi talk about political issues can make the sermon relevant and exciting. It can also alienate a segment of the congregation, and I'm sure that's something they probably talk about in, in your schooling is, how much can you say? You want to speak your mind, but you have to know your community. So, even the topic of Israel could be divisive in, or, AIPAC versus, another organization, so it's tough. Rabbis have lost jobs over, political sermons and whether it was something that, came from the Bible or not. So it's that balancing, knowing your community and being relevant at the same time.
Yeah. Certainly knowing your community is an important part of being a spiritual guide and counselor in the breadth of what a rabbi can be for a community, and certainly what I try to be. But I think this feeling that she has that, that the Torah has embedded within it, as Steve said, certain ethical teachings, certain political bias, and that means that it is appropriate to think about Judaism as being inherently political, as having a bias. Even though, as Rob pointed out, that means that you could, think that Judaism's bias is on either side of a particular spectrum. Like, to say that Judaism is uninterested in the political, or that Judaism shouldn't enter into the political realm, that might be missing the point. Like, I think she might even find like the engagement with the political to be an important part of Judaism, even if it was somebody disagreed with her political approach. I don't know, maybe not. That could be an interesting question to ask her.
Rabbi,
Yeah, Linda.
I could be way off base with this, but I feel like for years and years and years, where rabbis were not allowed to speak about politics. During sermons, in the back of my mind, I feel like that, but you all know much more about this than I do, that you lose your nonprofit status if you do that.
That's not true.
Well, now it's been revoked.
No. It was never true.
Okay.
Rabbis' nonprofit status can only be revoked if you say you must vote for this particular candidate. But politics isn't just endorsing candidates, right? Certainly, I would never endorse a candidate from the Bima, and doing so would be difficult in terms of our nonprofit status. Wouldn't necessarily immediately disqualify us, but it would be difficult. I will also say, right, my contract and most rabbinic contracts have a phrase in it called freedom of the pulpit, and it means you can't tell the rabbi what they can or can't talk about from the Bima. You can not rehire a rabbi, but you are not allowed to fire a rabbi based on what they said. Endorsing a political candidate is sort of a different category, because that isn't the same sort of issue. But I'm allowed to preach about political issues. I mean, that's part of what it means to have freedom of the pulpit, and I do. I certainly would not endorse any particular candidate. Bob Weisberg, you have to unmute.
About the politics and ethics issue, I think if you're dealing with ethics, with what's right or wrong to do or not to do, you invariably get involved in politics, because that's often involves positions taken by a particular party, a particular group in the struggle for power. The trouble is when you get involved in thinking this is, endorsing a particular power structure gets into politics. It's not surprising, given her previous work, that she would intertwine ethics and politics in terms of the Torah. I think you can't not see that. That's the point.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, and she does explicitly talk about her work with the Obamas and the Obamas' political agenda as dovetailing nicely with her understanding of the overwhelming bias of rabbinic teachings and Judaism and the biblical message of the prophets, etc. And so for sure, like her particular progressive attitude in her political life does sort of intertwine with her understanding of Judaism, no question.
Yeah.
All right, does anyone else have something to say about this topic before we move on to our next topic? Oh, Steve.
It's on this question of what you can read into the text or not. This gets into the question that I tend to think of as being the Protestant versus Catholic split of whether there's an intercursor between you and the text, or if you can just approach the text with anything you want. In Judaism, it's not quite the same, but it's a little bit of the Reform versus the Conservative or Orthodox, where is the text freestanding as a text, in which case you can indeed go take to suit your needs, or do you think that there is an interpretation that comes along with it, a second Torah that would constrain how we can read the text through the history of how it's been read by others? I have found that the book did a really good job drawing in midrash, but didn't do as much in terms of textual readings and understanding kind of, if we accept the textual tradition, the rabbinic tradition about how to read the document, it didn't engage with that as much as it did with the midrashic side, which is ethical more than halachic.
I think that's a great segue to the next question, which is, what do you think about the Talmudic approach to interpreting sacred texts? Is there something to be said for having more dogma and less debate? Ruth.
I'm still thinking about this very carefully. I think the book was great, though, I must say. I read it quite a while back, quite a while back, and was very, very pleased to receive it, the gift of it, which I've passed on to my daughter.
Terrific. I hope that you invite her to join us on Sunday night. It's open to the community.
I'm hoping that she will have the time, yes.
Yeah. Bob, you have to unmute. You have to unmute.
You have to unmute, Bob.
Yeah, we can't hear you because you're muted.
Okay, now?
Yep.
Yeah, I think there's room for a follow-up book to answer the questions that she precipitates. And I suggest the authors for that book would be two people, Harold Kushner and Elliot Dorff. They're in probably the best positions to answer the questions that she precipitates. But she's asking common questions. Everybody thinks of it. And getting back to the thing is, why remain Jewish? Why are you Jewish? The reasons why you're Jewish, there are many reasons for that. And I think that, what's his name? Dawkins, who wrote The God Delusion, answers a lot of that. But we're losing 50% of our Jewish people who are born Jewish. We're losing them. Whole generations have gone. If I look at my 5 cousins, only one remains Jewish. The rest decide they're not going to be Jewish, whether they intermarried or even if they don't. So the question has to come out, why remain Jewish? And that has to be answered. And the position to do this falls with the rabbis, I think, today. The rabbis can keep out of the political sphere. They have higher priority things to discuss, the attributes of God, why remain Jewish, and you're remaining Jewish, not because of the Holocaust or anti-Semitism, but we have people around who can answer this, and it has to be brought down to her level. Okay, it's a very good book, but it points out that we have failed in educating people like herself, which is the majority. We have failed from the pulpit to answer these things. And the quicker we get back to have our sermons center around these things in a dogma viewpoint and a philosophical viewpoint, then we get on a winning path.
Yeah, so that definitely was the approach that was tried by the rabbis of the previous generation, and it did not work. I grew up with a rabbi who spoke dogmatically from the Bima, and I do not find that ended up giving people a sense of what was meaningful about Judaism. To me, the philosophical questions are important underpinnings to living a meaningful life, to having a sense of spirituality, to living a life that is in the moment, that is centered, that is consistent with my values. To me, Sarah Hurwitz's approach here says, yeah, okay, Kushner offers one response to a post-Holocaust world, to the idea of suffering. Great, but it isn't the only way to respond. Another way to respond is by going out and feeding hungry people. A response is by going out and providing blankets to people who need it. And even more than those like Band-Aids, there's a response that says we have to fix the systemic issues that are making our society less just. And those systemic issues, Judaism has something to say about. And so to me, right, living a meaningful life, that's actions, not just philosophy. I guess maybe I have a bias on this too, which is I thought I was going to be a philosophy major in college. And I went to college and I took philosophy classes, and I found that the philosophy classes didn't have enough heart. They didn't have enough plot to keep me interested. And so I ended up becoming an anthropology major, because in some certain sense, anthropology felt to me like applied philosophy. Like we still read a lot of philosophical arguments about what the nature of culture is and what society is supposed to do, and Durkheim and Mauss and all of these folks. And but there was a plot, and the plot was the lived lives of human beings, like what people do and why they do what they do. And to me, those questions were questions which gave the philosophical underpinnings flesh onto the bones that gave me something to hold on to. And in some ways, I feel like that's what Sarah's talking about here. If all we do is talk about philosophy, people are going to zone out. People are not going to be connected. Connection has to come from a multifaceted approach. All right, back to this question about, is there something to be said for having more dogma and less debate? I do sometimes hear from congregants, Rabbi, when I ask you what Judaism says about X or Y, when I ask you about kashrut, I don't want you to say, well, some Jewish people say this, and some Jewish people say this, and some Jewish people say this. I want you to just say, here's what you should do, right? I do get that a lot, right? The conservative movement is a middle movement within the spectrum of Jewish practice in America today, both in the Orthodoxy and in Reform. There is an approach that is more dogmatic. In our tradition and in the conservative movement, there's this and this and this. Here's a menu. Mark.
I think one of the things I liked about the book is she talks about Judaism is an action religion. So I think, and I think that's important. How can you save the world if you just think about it? I think you have to do things, and that seems to be the direction that she is kind of talking about, and it makes a lot of sense, and it makes it a lot more practical and a lot more interesting.
Beautiful. One of my questions was exactly about that. So on pages 88 to 91, she talks about an action-based spirituality. Sarah Hurwitz says that Judaism has an action-based spirituality. What do you think of the idea of an action-based spirituality? Does following Jewish law by doing things like helping those in need or refraining from speaking unkindly feel like a spiritual experience to you? Why or why not? Yeah, Mark, go ahead.
I think Jerry was talking about this. Doing makes it spiritual. If you're following certain practices, and see if I can articulate this. If you're following certain practices, and by helping people, if this is part of the way you practice Judaism, I think that's a wonderful thing.
Other folks, did you resonate with her idea of an action-based spirituality?
Yep.
Yeah, Marcia.
Well, don't other religions do that too? So how are we different? Catholics believe in good works and all that. So I think what we're missing is an education. The kids know they're Jewish, but they know nothing really about it. They never get, and I know in Hebrew school, they never get to read Psalms. They learn about holidays over and over and over again, but they don't learn anything in depth. And I think that's the problem, partly.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something, I definitely think that there is definitely something broken in our religious school education, and that, you know, I definitely have some ideas about ways that we could approach that, which maybe if I'm here longer term at Congregation Agudat Achim, we'll be able to get into some of those. To me, I once worked at a religious school where the program was doing a book club for 3rd through 5th graders. That is 3rd graders, 4th graders, and 5th graders. And each age had a book that they read each month, and then they came in and discussed it. And they had to read it with their parents, and there were discussion questions, and then they came in and discussed it. And I found that the kids who were reading these books and then discussing them were way more engaged because they were reading novels, they were reading fiction. They were way more engaged in the Jewish values and the Jewish texts and the Jewish concepts that were contained in those books than the kids who came just to learn about the holidays and prayers. I think there's something really powerful about giving kids books that reflect their own experience, their own lived experience, and also giving them books that force them to encounter what it would be like to be an Israeli kid growing up, or a kid growing up in 1920s New York, and you know, or a book that describes you know, a different time and place of being Jewish, but also relates to these same values, right? So there are ways to do education, Jewish education, better than the way we've been doing it. And I totally agree with you that we, you know, the kids go to religious school and they learn the same things year after year, and that's not serving them well in terms of making them feel like Judaism is meaningful. But I will also say this: if you learned math until 7th grade and then didn't learn any math after 7th grade, all you would think that math was like up to algebra 1. Like you'd be like, okay, I can figure out what x is if the equation is, you know, 35 plus x equals 17. all right, I got it, you know, like, but you wouldn't know geometry or trigonometry or pre-calculus or calculus. And it wasn't until calculus that I felt like math got interesting. Before that, math was fun because it was easy. Like you started out with an equation and you were able to solve it and you got the right answer. Yes, right. It's nice to just get the right answer. But once I got to calculus and I had to figure out things and try to prove things and had to, really, it was more intellectual. Then all of a sudden math was like, oh, wow. So this is why people become mathematicians. This is why people are interested in advanced science. This is right. And so, look, I mean, I ended up going into the humanities. I'm a rabbi. I didn't go into science. Many of you here did, right? But I feel like part of our problem is most Jews have a 7th grade knowledge of Judaism. And it's the same as if you had a 7th grade knowledge of math, but like Judaism, a high school knowledge of Judaism would already give you more understanding of the questions that Judaism is asking and the multivocal approach of Judaism and the Talmudic approach to Judaism, right? Taking one adult ed class, right, can vastly change your understanding of what Judaism has to offer, right? That's what happened to her, right? She took an adult intro to Judaism class. She didn't take a sophisticated class. She didn't take a rabbinical school class. She took an intro to Judaism for adults. And I do think that, right, one of the reasons why I asked the adult ed committee this year to focus on a back to the basics approach is because it's really important to go back to the basics every once in a while and to think about what are the gaps in our knowledge? Why is this meaningful? Bob,
I think it's interesting that you mentioned, yes, she took that class and that's what led to another class and another class and other experiences, etc. But what started her off on that path was a conversion experience that she had at that retreat that she went to.
She
somehow or other, by some coincidence, went on this retreat of a silent meditation retreat for a week, which is, such a radical experience to do. And certainly not a very Jewish experience, but it was run by Jewish people and so on and so forth, at least not Jewish but as many people conceive of it. And there you go. So I think that kind of is an illustration there. She had a deep spiritual experience that she didn't understand, and that set her on the path. And then she went to fill in the gaps and fill in the words and fill in the knowledge. And that's a very interesting path. That's a path that all of us could consider following. And that's not necessarily in that order, but those elements need to be there somehow.
Yeah. Rudolf Otto wrote in The Idea of the Holy that you have to have an experience of the numinous. That's what Rudolf Otto understood the holy to be, the numinous. You have that, it's experiential. You have to have an experience of it to be able to understand it. And without that first experience of it, you're just talking around it.
Yeah, and that can happen all at once, or it could happen gradually,
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the point.
Absolutely. And there are definitely things that you can do that open your heart and yourself up to having more spiritual experiences. And there are things that you can do that close yourself off. And I do think that part of Judaism's purpose is to open us up to experiences of connection.
Yep.
Sue-Ann, yeah, you have to unmute. There you go.
Thank you. In defense of the Hebrew school, that I've been teaching at for over 40 years. Obviously, to most of you, that our hours have been cut. When most of the kids, parents that I'm saying now, I taught your children, that they went twice a week, 2 hours each session. And they came, most of them came Saturday morning for services and Sunday school. So we had to cut the curriculum a lot. And most of you know that we had conversational Hebrew as one of the classes. And Marcia, you were doing special things with the kids as well. And they were reading stories in Hebrew and translating them. And a long, long time ago, Debbie Friedson had made a little mitzvah book for us, because she's an artist and she did a beautiful job. And there were probably 20 mitzvot. And the children would do a mitzvah, we would talk about it, and their parents had to sign it, and it would come back to school. That was a very successful project that we had. And we also had, but this is controversial, I guess, we also taught the kids to write Hebrew in cursive. So that was a very big project. And then we talked about the Forward and all the different newspapers. So we've had to change things, eliminate them, to actually teach the most important things, because we had a limited amount of hours.
Yeah, no question about it. I'm not attacking our religious school.
No, I'm just defending our work that we did.
Oh yeah, I mean, I have huge respect and value the hard work of the teachers who are giving our kids like us a window into what is meaningful in Judaism. And I think we have to be explicit in our teacher education that that's part of our goal, that the goal is to engage our kids in what is meaningful about Judaism and the ways in which Judaism helps them to live a meaningful life, so that when they get older and can make a choice to take an adult education class or make a choice to do practices in their lives that are Jewish, they have a knowledge base that they can rely on in order to be able to do that. And a set of experiences that makes them feel connected to the deep traditions of our people and the way that those traditions are still relevant in all of the ways that Sarah Hurwitz points out that they are relevant. But I think, yeah, Steve.
So also coming from being taught in the Hebrew high school, although I'm not doing it right at the moment, there are three major movements in American Judaism. Two of them are having substantial problems retaining kids going into adulthood. The third one, not so much. And one conclusion you can draw is that the two movements that are losing more of their children should do their education in a way that's more like the third movement that's not having that problem. And one thing you might say, looking at the course that I teach in the Hebrew high school, is that it is a little bit of a step in that direction. And I don't know to what extent, I mean, I'm doing that because it interests me. I'm not really sure if that's the right solution, but to what extent is the Orthodox approach to teaching kids how to find meaning in education something that we should borrow from? And to what extent is it something that wouldn't work for us if we tried it because our circumstances are different?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, what's different about like an Orthodox approach to Jewish education, different from ours, goes back to what Sue Ann said. They invest more hours in it. And also that there is a commitment to do Jewish practices. And I think that goes back to this question that we're talking about action-based spirituality. Yeah. Right? Like families in our own school that have Jewish practice at home, right, engage differently with Judaism in the religious school class
Absolutely, yeah.
than families that are doing less Jewish stuff at home. Like all of the actions, like it doesn't have to be lighting Shabbat candles, though I think lighting Shabbat candles is a really great practice. But it's also if you are refraining from speaking unkindly and thinking about that refraining as being a Jewish action, and that's how you talk about it in your house, that's going to change how you interact with the religious school curriculum. And I do think that one of the challenges that Orthodox Judaism has is that they don't necessarily preference or value these like refraining from speaking unkindly as a Jewish spiritual practice. In Orthodox Judaism, it tends to be the case, and I have spent some time in Orthodox Jewish circles, that things like Shabbat observance and Kashrut observance are preferenced over some of these other spiritual practices in Judaism. And so that's also an interesting aspect, it also goes back to Marcia's point, like lots of people are kind. What makes us uniquely and particularly Jewish is some of these other practices like Shabbat and Kashrut. And there's definitely something to that too. So this leads me to what I think is going to be our last question for this evening. And then I would like to spend a little bit toward the end of our time together, just thinking about whether we have any questions that we want to ask the author. So my final question is, how would you define Jewish observance? What do you think makes someone Jewishly observant? It goes to what we were just talking about. Gary.
You're talking with me?
Oh yeah, I thought you raised your hand.
No, I was mostly just sighing. I was sighing because I'm thinking, yes, I would like an answer to that question.
I think there's so many different levels of observance that could be counted as observance that it's hard to pin it down.
Mm-hmm. So people sometimes tell me, oh, I'm not Shabbat observant. So, sometimes people who tell me that are people who come to synagogue every week for Shabbat services, who have a Friday night dinner every week, who light candles every week. And they say, I'm not Shabbat observant because they drive to shul on Shabbat. So to them, right, the fact that they drove to shul means that they are not shomer Shabbat. They're not observant, right? To me, I would rather reclaim that word of observant and say the way you observe Shabbat is by lighting candles, having a Shabbat meal, and driving to shul to come to shul on Shabbat. That is your observance of Shabbat. What does it mean to be observant of Shabbat, if not to come to shul on Shabbat? So to me, that works as a definition of observant. A person, I would rather have that person say, here's how I observe Shabbat, than to say, I am not observant of Shabbat. And I feel the same way about kashrut. You don't eat pork, you don't eat shellfish, you don't eat meat and dairy together, but you don't have separate dishes. All right, you have one set of dishes in your house, but you have dairy meals and meat meals. Okay, you don't eat them at the same time. You could say, oh, I don't keep kosher because I don't have two sets of dishes. I have one set of pots. Right? Or you could say, the way I keep kosher is by not eating forbidden foods and by not eating meat and milk together. And I keep kosher because that is my observance of kashrut. We have people, right? To me, I would rather have people say, I am observant of kashrut, and here's how I observe kashrut. Now, honestly, you could say, I observe kashrut by being vegan. I observe kashrut by limiting the amount of red meat that I eat, because that actually is part of my Jewish value of protecting the world. And red meat is a huge drain on the environment and creates a huge environmental strain. So I only have a hamburger once a year, and that's how I keep kashrut. Or when I buy meat, I buy grass-fed meat. That's how I keep kashrut. I'd rather encourage people to define their observance in that kind of a way, rather than saying, oh, I'm not observant. Look, does that respond to your question, Gary?
Actually, yes, that's very helpful. At least it makes me feel better.
So part of the intent, what you're putting forth here, and I think is also what Sarah puts forth, is that the inner intention, like the intention that you have in terms of being Jewish and joining with the tribe as such in their practices, as imperfect as it may be, is you're on the continuum, and that's part of what counts. And that's important, whether you just light candles for Shabbat and don't do anything else, or whether you do the whole thing, whatever.
Yeah, we're only supposed to be focusing on the first half of the book, but I
Right.
really found her discussion of her own Shabbat observance to be really interesting.
Yeah.
Right, both in the fact that of the way that she got more protective of her Shabbat observance, and the way that right now she is less protective of it. And in what ways has that been meaningful to her? And in what ways, when it no longer was serving her meaningfully, that she didn't need it anymore, right? In some ways, it felt to me like the busier her work life got, the more she needed to be protective of her Shabbat experience. And once she was out of the White House and her work-life balance was better, she let go some of the protections around her Shabbat observance because she didn't need them as much. Steve.
I'm a little concerned about some of the things I've heard. If you think about the saying, the way that I'm going to keep kosher is to be vegan, for example. Christians do that too. People who are secular do that too. I don't know that there is, certainly it's a wonderful thing to be vegan. And if you're going to be vegan, you are going to end up following with a lot of the kashrut laws. But I don't know that saying I'm a vegan constitutes a particularly Jewish value. And furthermore, I think the Jewish values that we hold do not hold that eating meat is intrinsically problematic. There are some issues about it, but it doesn't draw the same conclusions about meat eating that most vegans do. And I think this comes back to something I mentioned briefly earlier, that we don't just have a Torah, we have a tradition of interpretation. And to identify something as a Jewish value, I think should mean that in some way it engages with that history of understanding with the text, and merely saying, I am vegan, therefore I am kosher, fails to do that. I think you can tie them, but it involves more intentionality about why one is a vegan that distinguishes a Jewish vegan from a Christian vegan, from a Buddhist vegan, from a Jain, from all the different religions that approach meat eating in different ways. That there should be something that is uniquely Jewish to it, and just saying I'm a vegan doesn't rise to that threshold for me.
Yeah, I completely agree with you about that, and I sort of, that example was sort of shorthand for, that is to say, you can say the way that I keep kosher is by being vegan, and not only does that fit within my understanding of the values of kashrut, but it also fits within my Jewish conception of protecting the world, of Baal Tashchit, of a concern about the environment of Shmirat Adama, right? That there are all these other Jewish values that also are a part of my decision to be vegan. That is a different formulation than saying I am vegan, therefore I am kosher, right? I think about it. My first example is more what I was talking about, not the, that is to say, I think there's a way to formulate your veganism in a way that does respond to Jewish values. Now, I totally agree with you that Judaism doesn't say that meat eating is inherently bad, right? But Judaism does have, both in its biblical texts and its rabbinic texts, voices which speak to an ideal world in which meat eating is unnecessary. And we can see that even in the second chapter of Genesis, where, right, God gives Adam and Eve a garden that they can eat of the growing things, not of the other animals. And it's only after human beings leave the garden that eating animals becomes a part of the biblical process. If there's a desire to return to Gan Eden, to return to paradise, right, that return might involve refraining from eating animals. Now, that's only one voice. There's also a voice that says, when the Messiah comes, we'll all eat the Passover offering together in the temple in Jerusalem, and that's certainly a meat sacrifice. So, I'm not saying there's only one voice about this, and I do eat meat and enjoy it very much. But I do think that there are ways to conceive of food practice as a kashrut practice, if that makes sense. All right, so I'd like to bring our conversation to a close and invite anybody who has a question that they would like me to consider asking to Sarah to share that with me now, either by unmuting and sharing, or raising your hand and sharing, or by typing it into the chat. And we'll spend a few minutes on that. And then, like I said at the beginning, I really hope that everybody comes to hear Sarah Hurwitz's talk this Sunday night in this same Zoom room, immediately following our Mincha service at 7:15.
Mincha service. That means the
Any thoughts on questions? Yeah, Mishka.
Kind of working from what Bob was saying, and he and I have talked about this anyway. I would be curious to ask her, if she hadn't had that retreat, what else might have brought her into thinking about her Judaism? She fell into it, it seems. What else might, and this goes back to what we were talking about, losing Jews over the last generations, especially. What is it that an adult would bring an adult into the fold who had not thought about it before? What was, other than the serendipity of this particular retreat she did, why would she have, what would have done it for her?
Yeah, I think that's great. That's a great question, sort of thinking about, is your experience replicable? Can we provide to other folks we know, a kind of experience that provides them a sense of the meaning of Judaism, aside from, reading your book?
We've already provided that one.
Even being curious to find out, especially after the 7th grade, which I don't even know how far she got, but, having pushed it aside or not having gotten it at all.
Yeah.
What would stimulate somebody? What could have been hers other than what her experience was with that one particular retreat?
Yeah, Steve Schmidt.
So a similar question, I don't know if this is a fair question for her, because I don't think she is a Hebrew school parent yet, but how do we get Hebrew school parents to turn this light bulb on? Because that brings more practice into the home, which then helps the kids engage. And I think that the problem of getting the kids more engaged and getting the parents more engaged are two sides of the same coin. And if she is in a position to say anything about that, it'd be really helpful, because we need to know about that. If not from her, then from somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be fun. Yes, I do hope that some folks, that sending this book out to everybody, that it's sitting in their house, and even if they haven't read it yet, that it's there and on their night table or whatever. We did this project to get the book out there, so I do hope. But yes, I think that would be valuable. I'll see whether there's a way to ask that question. Does anybody have a different question for her?
I have another question, if I'm allowed a second question. How did I'd like her to talk about what she was doing as she became more involved in Jewish life. How did that affect her working with the Obamas? And did she have any particular impact that she knows about? And I ask that somewhat from an odd personal perspective, perhaps, in that one of our cousins, actually a cousin of Bob's, was invited to light Hanukkah candles with the Obamas. About, I think it was 2000, I don't remember, sometime during his second term. And it was a very, very, very moving experience.
Mhm.
Partly it came out of his involvement with Hayes. He's a very important personage in Hayes.
Mhm.
And Hayes actually recommended it, but was there something that she did to help inform them about Jewish life? Jewish values, Jewish, the big joke has always been, it's not a joke, but who started labor unions? Jews. Who was involved in making sure that there was a day off for workers? Jews. So how did that political was there any kind of interweaving for them, for her?
Mhm. Yeah. I was invited, by the way, to go to a Passover Seder or Passover whatever with the current second gentleman on Zoom.
Nice.
Second gentleman is Jewish, Doug Emhoff. It didn't end up being at a time I could make, but I was invited.
That would have been fun.
Yeah.
And you could put that on your resume. That would have been
All right.
All right. We are reaching our time boundary. I see that people are ready to go to bed, and so am I. I just want to thank everybody for your engagement in this discussion. I hope it was meaningful to you, and that we can continue the conversation both this Sunday night with Sarah Hurwitz, and next Thursday night, we have an opportunity to continue this conversation with a follow-up. After we talk to her, we have an opportunity to talk next week, both about the second half of the book, and I do have some more questions, although I figured that we would start by reflecting on the experience that we had hearing from her on Sunday night. And so next Thursday, again, an informal opportunity to engage with our congregation around this book, and to think about the ways in which it is meaningful to us and inspires us to seek meaning in our own Judaism. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
I'm going to count the Omer now.
Good
Good
night.
night, all. See you
Yes,
Sunday.
I think that's a great idea. Did someone just suggest to count the Omer?
Yes.
Yeah, let's do that. I'm going to share my screen.
Rabbi, I haven't missed a night since I've been getting that thing from the congregation.
That's
Oh,
good.
nice.
That's good.
Yeah, I worked hard on that. Here's tonight's.
Okay.
All right. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat haomer. Hayom shisha v'esrim yom shehem shlosha shavuot v'chamisha yamim ba'omer. Today is 26 days, which is 2 weeks and 5 days in the counting of Omer, and it is Od Shebenetzach, splendor within eternity. And the quote here is from Susan Windle, splendor with persistence. Let us pause here in these perilous times, notice where we find ourselves, alive and growing, reaching for life, rooted in eternity, diverse, manifold, single in purpose. And the prompt, the question to think about or to write, think of something beautiful that made you experience a moment of connection or a moment of gratitude. What was it? How does it feel to express gratitude for it? Which I think actually is a very beautiful way to conclude our conversation about this book this evening. And we still have 24 days left of the Omer. So if you aren't getting the daily Omer emails that you would like to be, there's still time to sign up. All right. Lila Tov.
Lila
Lila
Tov.
Tov.